Good evening and welcome to Writer's Block. I am your host, Ideyah, and today we will be discussing, in light of what would have been his 201st birthday, Edgar Allan Poe. Poe was born January 19, 1809, to parents David and Betty Poe, who were traveling actors. Shortly into his third birthday, he was orphaned and then adopted by the Allan family, with whom he lived until he was able to make his own. The rest of his life was filled with as much tragedy and mystery as any of his stories. Nobody knows why he got off the train in Baltimore in a high fever and alcoholic state. The only person that was around him when he died was a doctor friend who heard him utter his last words, "Lord, help my poor soul." In honor of Edgar Allan Poe, I will be reading the final few passages from The Masque of the Red Death, which happens to be my very favorite story of his. Throughout this story, up until this point, the Prince Prospero held his favorite people inside his castle, and they held a gigantic ball where everyone was able to dress in the most outrageous costumes there ever were. Even the most grotesque costumes were invited, and it seemed to be the ghastlier the better. But there is one figure who has appeared who seems to have shaken everyone down to the very core. Even the prince. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of this stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this may have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around, but the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood. His broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or the blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room which stood the prince, with the group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand. And now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the murmur had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth his hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he was passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the room to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revellers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seized the murmurer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock. Gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they had handled with so violent a rudeness untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revellers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. The story proves that death does not care who you are. It doesn't care if you're the richest, the poorest, the most famous, or the least known. It will find you, and it will put you in your place. It is a pity that Edgar Allan Poe had such a short life, dying October 7th, 1849, in a hospital. Because I'm sure that there were many more wonderful writings to come out of the man had he been given the chance. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you next time when we discuss another wonderful writer.